Hello, I'm editor Keelan King, and welcome to The Foretop, a roundtable discussion featuring leaders and innovators of the food and beverage industry on today's hot button topics, with host Katherine Cole. And now, here's Katherine Cole.
Well, hello from the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. Katherine Cole here. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 87 of The Foretop. In 4 years of producing this podcast, we have never taken a break, so right now we are running our best of the Foretop season so that you can hear our finest past episodes while we plan the future of the show. And you, dear listeners, can help with that. Please go to theforetop.org, scroll down on the homepage, and click on the survey button to share your feedback on building a better Foretop. And now let's get to this episode, which was originally recorded back in 2017, but it's absolutely relevant still. As I record this updated introduction, it's February 2021, and congressional leaders are taking steps to legalize marijuana on a federal level, and the points made in this conversation still hold true. Also, did you know how hard it is to cook with marijuana? Neither did I until I listened to this conversation. There are a few details that sound anachronistic now. Jacob Grier, for example, mentions attending a massive beer festival in Australia, which I cannot even imagine right now because we're in a pandemic. And Martha Holmberg mentions the now sadly departed Anthony Bourdain. We all really miss him, but we didn't want to edit anything out because the discussion is just so vibrant and interesting. So now, allow me to introduce myself 3 years ago. Hit it, Katherine Cole. Here in the studios of OPB, I'm joined by Laurie Wolf, author of many books, including Herb, The Medical Marijuana Dispensary, Cooking with Cannabis, and Marijuana Edibles. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And Martha Holmberg, a cookbook author and the CEO of the International Association of Culinary Professionals. Hello, Martha.
Hi, Katherine. Hi, everybody.
And Jacob Grier, an expert in both policy and cocktails, whose work has appeared in The Washington Post, The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, The Los Angeles Times, and Reason. Hello, Jacob.
Hi, Katherine. Thanks for having me back.
Now for our first course. We are suddenly experiencing an altered state of reality in which it's legal to purchase and consume marijuana in many states, which has many cooks asking how they can bring cannabis into the kitchen as an aromatic ingredient. Laurie Wolf, you have written 4 books about cooking with cannabis, and you were recently featured in a New Yorker article that dubbed you the Martha Stewart of marijuana edibles. Maybe you can start us off with the basics. Don't you have to go through some preliminary steps to even start cooking with cannabis?
Yes, you do. In order to get full potency from cannabis, you need to do something that's called a decarboxylation. And what happens during that process is your cannabis goes into the oven for 40 minutes at 240 degrees. And what that does is converts the THCA into THC, which is the psychotropic cannabinoid that helps to get you high. There are many cannabinoids, but THC is the one that people tend to be looking for, kind of recreational enjoyment of cannabis.
Well, that sounds easy enough, but I have to admit, when marijuana was legalized in Oregon, I tried that once, and my toaster immediately started just spewing smoke, and it was scary, and I was worried that I was making my dog and my children high. Right. Is there a trick to this?
It does get pretty smelly in the kitchen when you're doing that. A lot of cannabis kitchens don't even allow decarboxylating because the smell is everywhere. There are some techniques. People use a sous vide method for decarboxylation.
Okay, can you explain how you would do that?
I haven't done it, but what you do is you keep your cannabis in a well-sealed bag and you place it in water that's the exact temperature needed to decarboxylate. So that seems to be the least smelly way to go. I think we're moving to a new kitchen now that will allow us to decarboxylate, but previously, we've had to do it in the middle of the night, so no neighbors, when we're next to a little grocery store, and the man who owns it came in frantic because his 5-year-old was in the store, and he was afraid, that she might get high.
Yeah.
Which, isn't very likely. In fact, I think it's probably impossible, but it's smelly.
And reading some of your recipes, Laurie, it sounds like you rely a lot on cannabis-infused oils. Can you explain what that's all about?
Sure. Once you have decarboxylated your cannabis, you put it into some fat. It really needs a fat to adhere so that the THC and all the other cannabinoids adhere to it, and it allows the infusion to happen. There are oils and butters, which is what we use in our business. Once it's decarboxylated, it's about a 3-hour process, heating the cannabis with whatever oil you choose.
So you can't do any low-fat cooking if you want cannabis in your food.
The thing is, Martha, when you make potent olive oil, coconut oil, it's a tiny bit. A 5 milligram of THC serving could be half a teaspoon. So it's not like you have to, intake, cups and cups of olive oil.
Butter, pound cakes with a pound of butter.
And what you would do if you wanted a very buttery pound cake, just a small portion of the butter would be infused. So, that's not exactly a diet food, but you really don't need that much infused butter if you're making a strong infusion.
Yeah, and so when you're cooking with these fats, is part of the idea to get any of the flavor of the cannabis into the final dish, or is that kind of a separate, you just kind of hide it?
That's a great question, and I have found that the majority of people don't want to taste the cannabis.
The one time I haven't had a lot of edibles, but I had some homemade cannabis shortbread once, and I thought it tasted just terrible. It was like shortbread with this weird herbal flavor to it that it wasn't appealing at all.
Yeah, and that's my feeling as well. I don't want to taste it, but I know a bunch of people who are like, if I don't taste it, I don't think I'm going to feel the effects, and I'm sort of bummed out. So for some people, just that hint, or more than a hint, makes them feel positively, makes them ready for the experience.
So, Laurie, I'm wondering if those people are of a certain generation where you're more used to actually smoking a joint or smoking weed where you have that full fragrance, which doesn't relate to getting you high, but it is, it's kind of nostalgic almost.
Yeah, I think that's
I do feel like,
right.
as someone of that generation, I do feel there's a little bit lost with edibles or with vaping because it's not that lovely burning smell. Yeah,
and I continue to love that burning smell. I think that people who are cooking with cannabis, when I write recipes, I always say that, if you are looking for that smell, you can kind of pull back on spices and herbs and let the flavor shine through. Or there are some foods, we make this white chocolate granola bar. And when that has a hint of the cannabis taste, it's amazing. It just blends perfectly, perfect balance. But mostly, I find that people are just like, wow, this is amazing. I feel the effects, but I never tasted it.
But Laurie, I'm surprised that the direction so often is sweet, because cannabis, at least from its aroma, seems to be herbaceous and savory. It reminds me of oregano, rosemary.
Yes.
I would think that it would be in spaghetti sauce, or, why in pastries and baked goods and sweet things?
Well, I think it will be in sauce. I know now there's a hot sauce. Most people, when they go into a dispensary, want a sweet. But I'm noticing more and more people. It's a different demographic, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and older are kind of, is there something, I don't want to be eating sweets every time I want to get high or medicate. So I think you'll see more and more of that coming into the market. I know our cheese cracker is doing really well. It's only been out for a month, but people seem really happy to have a savory option. And a lot of people who have diabetes use cannabis, and they certainly don't want the sugary things.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So one of the things that's been controversial in the cocktail world is cannabis cocktails. And how does that process work? And have you experimented at all with that?
We've kind of taken a stand that we don't mix cannabis and alcohol. I know people. I don't really drink, so I'm not a good judge. But I know a bunch of people who, when they've done both to excess, it's been a disaster.
Well, I think
but it's
doing either one
it's
might
true.
be a disaster.
It's true. That I feel I have just, when we've done cannabis dinners or when I'm writing recipes, I just say, avoid alcohol. And there are cocktails, we make cocktails with cannabis-infused sugar or cannabis-infused honey or sangria. You can make some wonderful cocktails without the alcohol. So we just kind of played it safe and not suggested mixing them. I see that there's wine now that's infused with cannabis, and I don't know. I just feel like they each have their place, and I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, Jacob, have you had any cannabis cocktails? Because right now in a bar or a restaurant, it's not legal, right? There's a pretty severe separation between cannabis sales or consumption and alcohol, I think.
There is, though. I have been served in a bar, even before it was legalized at all in Oregon. There were bartenders making...
That bar shall remain nameless.
It will definitely remain nameless here on the air. But yeah, they would do a tincture of marijuana that they could put a few drops into a drink in. And my recollection is having no effect whatsoever that I remember. But that is an issue that's come up, is people have published recipes on how to do cannabis cocktails, and then other people have pushed back saying, this is not specific enough. You have no idea what dosage you're going to get. You have no idea how it might affect your guests. So there's been a lot of pushback on people carelessly doing this.
That is
I think,
great point, Jacob.
You don't know what the interactions are going to be, because these are all things that are affecting, like, your receptors, your brain. And I think, like mixing any two medicines, you don't know, what it's going to do to your body and your metabolism.
Well, I think this brings up a question that I've heard from a lot of friends and sort of experienced myself about edibles in general, whether they're, Laurie, in an edible sweet or in a cocktail, is just the dosage issue.
Yeah.
The dosage, number one, is the maker educated enough and can control their sources and everything enough so that they know what they're putting into it? And then second, how do you react to it? Because I found with edibles, there's a much longer gestation period or whatever. And there's sometimes you'll be like, oh, okay, great, I'm feeling it. And then you're like, wow, I'm really feeling it. And then you're like, where's the plateau? And that can be, very disconcerting.
Absolutely. Terrible feeling. And I always say less is more with cannabis. Start low, go high. When you find the dose that feels right for you, don't think, well, it's going to be fun, I'm going to double it. I've had those kind of experiences. Nobody dies from too much, but you feel brutally awful. I think that if you're in a state where cannabis is legal, like Oregon, you are going to be able to comfortably buy an edible and not worry, because every single product that's sold has been lab tested, and it's been lab tested for pesticides, but primarily for what the potency is. And a serving in Oregon is 5 milligrams of THC. which is a very low dose, maybe the equivalent of a glass of wine. So I always suggest to people start with 5, and don't even like that same day add another 5. Like give yourself a few nights, try a 5. If you didn't really feel it, go to a 10, and go to a 15. But don't make the Maureen Dowd, mistake of eating the whole thing.
It was 2014, I think she wrote it.
It was,
and what she described, I've heard so many friends describe the same thing where she had a little bite of a chocolate bar, she didn't feel anything, and then she had maybe a bigger bite, and then suddenly she said in this column, Maureen Dowd said that she was curled up in the fetal position for 8 hours and she couldn't move.
Right.
And I hear that a lot, especially from women who it just seems like we just have a stronger reaction to maybe smaller dosages. And so Maureen Dowd said in that column that the package of that bar didn't say what a dosage was, and then the next day she was told, oh, you're supposed to cut it up into 16 pieces. But you're saying, Laurie, that in Oregon at least, something like that would be very clearly labeled.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if you have bud tenders who are the people, or budistas, they're the people who help you, make your cannabis decision, and there are like 30 strains. So, they know, hopefully they really know their stuff. And if it's delicious, too bad. Eat your 5 milligrams tonight because it's going to be a nightmare.
This is reminding me of a funny anecdote. I have a friend, Raquel Pelzal, who is a cookbook author, and she was co-writing a book with Bob Marley's daughter, Cedilla Marley, and the Marley family recipes, many of which were going to have cannabis in them. And her publisher wanted her to do the recipe testing in a state where cannabis is legal. Mm-hmm. So she spent a week at our house, did lots of recipe testing. And my husband does not smoke or do cannabis. He barely drinks. But he loves to eat. So there were a few. I came home once and he's like, I feel really weird. And I'm like, did you eat that carrot cake? And I told you not to do that. But it was so tasty.
So I really implore people to start low. It makes all the difference in the world. And cannabis is much more than a pleasure drug. It's medicine. I use it to it completely controls my epilepsy. I have gotten off major pharmaceuticals that have required monthly blood tests and made me feel awful. Literally now, if I take a puff or I eat a piece of an edible, if I have 6 milligrams of THC every day, I've been 5 years.
Wow.
Seizure and aura free.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing. It is kind of a miracle. My husband uses it for migraines. Gone. 5 minutes. Nothing. So I just want to spread the word that it's worth trying. And you don't have to have a bad experience.
Laurie is more than the Martha Stewart of cannabis. She's like the Reverend Billy Graham of cannabis.
I'm afraid that's a little. I've never ever called anything a miracle before.
Well, let's move on to our next topic, getting back to the thought of being curled up in a ball for 8 hours. You wouldn't want to miss your restaurant reservation. So for our second course today, we're going to talk about the question of, will weed wreck the restaurant trade? With more and more people consuming cannabis at home, how will the hospitality industry be affected? Martha Holmberg, you are the CEO of the IACP, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Are you hearing any concerns among chefs and restaurateurs that say wine and beer sales will fall as marijuana use rises?
I haven't been hearing that from our members or just anecdotally yet. I think because people haven't figured out what they're doing yet with this. It still has a little bit of an underground feeling of oh, wait. Oh, this is legal. Okay, yeah, I can, even talking about it on the radio, I'm a grown-up, and I had to be no, it's legal. I can talk about it. So I think we're really at the infancy of before the actual habits are going to form. I don't know, Jacob, if what your sense is, since you're in the bar world more than I am.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you. The big issue is whether any state's going to legalize. Smoking patios seems to be the most common thing that might come up. I know there was talk in Colorado of doing that, and I think they've put that on hold. Because they're not sure what the federal response is going to be now under Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump. And then I know Vegas has been looking at it as well, because I think right now you can legally buy marijuana in Nevada, but if you're, say, a tourist in Vegas, there's no public place where you can use it. So it doesn't really help their tourism industry to say that, well, you can buy this here, but you can't smoke it in your hotel room, and you can't smoke it at the casino, and you can't smoke it on the sidewalk. So what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So
I'd much rather walk into a casino filled with marijuana smoke than with the cigarette smoke that you get in most casinos.
For sure. I also think if people are going to go out to dinner, often they'll meet at someone's house and have a drink or a joint or an edible. It certainly does wonders for your appetite. It's going to take away from the let's share an entree thing. I think it's like get
we'll
off
have one
of my
everything on the menu, please.
So I do think the munchies, will keep people, going out to restaurants. And
So sales of salty foods
yeah.
and sweet foods will rise.
Yes, that's my prediction.
Well, I saw an interesting article. It was on Medium, and it was written by an editor-at-large at Foursquare, and she was just looking at the data, and she said that it looks like visits to bars and restaurants are staying solid. People are still going out, but purchases of liquor to consume at home are maybe leveling off in the states where marijuana is legal. I thought that was sort of interesting. That kind of goes with what you were saying, Laurie, that people maybe are just consuming at home.
Yeah.
You do see this, that in several of the states, the alcohol distributors have been among the lobbyists who are donating money to the anti-legalization campaigns.
Yeah.
So at least they think that's a concern, that there's going to be a substitution effect.
That's what I was going to say, is if that does seem to be a perception, that could be real trouble for cannabis because, the alcohol industry is so powerful and has so much money for lobbying. And
as well as the pharmaceutical industry, obviously, is
right.
also bankrolling those campaigns. But there is a possibility, too, though, that especially if it was legalized on the federal level, where you might see the distributors who now distribute alcohol might see an opportunity to go into distributing marijuana, which I think they're afraid of now. But for example, in Oregon, our liquor distribution, which is the state, is also handling marijuana, and so there might be an opportunity there for alcohol distributors to say we are experienced with these controlled substances, so if we legalize marijuana in our state, we should be the ones who get to sell it. So you might see some reverse campaigning that way.
Well, that is the other side of the coin, Jacob. And I just get the sense that there's a giant tsunami coming behind us that we aren't quite aware of money going into the cannabis industry. I mean, it's already there. I'm sure, Laurie, you know a lot about it. But, just the opportunity for corporations to be investing and making money. And it's a little worrisome in the sense that, the mom and pops or the artisans or the craft growers and all that are going to have to deal with that as well. But, anywhere there's opportunity for money, the laws can adapt.
Well, I'd also be interested in talking about the cultural aspect, because we all know the food and beverage industry definitely has its own sort of insider culture. And it does seem like cannabis is starting to enter kind of the same world. We have now interpening, is that the right word?
Terpenes.
Terpene, the weed sommelier movement. I guess a weed sommelier could be called a gangier. I've read these different words.
That word.
So it seems like the marijuana industry is kind of following the way that the coffee industry has gone with
wine,
cupping and wine, and of course beer too has its own sort of sommelier program.
Yes.
So what's happening in that side of the business?
In the last about 6 months, there's been a great focus on terpenes. And terpenes are terpenes are in flowers and plants, and they are what informs the taste and the smell of the strain of cannabis. And so when people go into dispensaries now, there's a lot more information available, and it definitely compares to wine tasting. When you're tasting wine and noticing the notes, what you're noticing a lot are the terpene profiles and the flavonoids. So cannabis has that. So it's a...
And you're not just talking about flavor and aroma. You're talking about the actual physical effect it has on you.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
so interesting.
So, Laurie and Katherine, to your point, I see a double-edged sword here. And one is this kind of emphasis, like having experts like the Gangiers, could either bring a preciousness and another layer of like, oh, I'm intimidated, or I don't know enough, in this way that a lot of people are intimidated by wine and beer. But on the other hand, it adds to first of all, it can be fascinating the way that all of us feel about wine and beer and food. Getting into those details is interesting, but it also can enhance the ritual around it. I mean,
yes.
That I think is part of any of this kind of substance. It's not just I immediately want to get high or I want to get drunk or something like that. It's enjoying all those pleasures that come from nature or from someone's craft of making a beer or making wine, and also the choice and the conversation and the way you open the bottle, or, just looking. I was somewhere where two young guys were talking about a vape pen for smoking cannabis, and they were like, oh, yeah, did you get the new X100 turbocharged thing? And I'm like,
yeah.
oh, no, here go the boys and their toys. But it's kind of part of the fun, is creating a little bit more of a ritual around it.
Yeah.
We would like to thank Westward Whiskey for sponsoring this episode of The Foretop. I am actually sampling Westward's American Single Malt Whiskey as I speak, so you get to hear my geeky tasting notes. You're welcome. This is a fabulous whiskey to serve straight up. It's got so much going on aromatically that it would be a shame to mix it into a cocktail, frankly. I am getting a really clear, beautiful note of ripe Oregon pear, accompanied by cinnamon and clove, oak, maybe a touch of pastry dough, and then as I take a taste, I'm getting citrus as well on the palate. Westward is a whiskey born from the unique culture, climate, and abundant resources of the Northwest. If you are a beer lover, you gotta try Westward's American Single Malt Stout Cask, which has aged in Oregon Stout ale barrels. Or try Westward's American Single Malt Pinot Noir Cask, which has spent time in Pinot barrels from our fabulous Willamette Valley wineries. I think I approve of that. If you are in the Portland area, head to westwardwhiskey.com for information on Westward's 4 local tasting rooms, including a couple of convenient locations in the PDX airport. I love these because you can grab a bottle to give as a gift as you're en route to your destination. And if you're out of state, you can still sign up for the Westward Whiskey Club on the Westward website and receive shipments throughout the year. And we have a special offer for our wonderful listeners. You can enjoy $10 off in-store or online through February 19, 2021 on all Westward offerings with the code FORTOP, that's FOURTOP. The fine print, minimum spend of $70, limited to 1 use per customer. Not valid with other discount codes. Anyway, thank you, Westward, for sponsoring the Foretop. We really, really appreciate it. And now, back to the show. And now we are going to switch gears a little bit. A lot of the discussion around safely legalizing marijuana has been about transparency in labeling these products. So for our third segment, we're going to take some time to consider some quirks of U.S. labeling law. And I promise it will be fun. So now our segment on truthiness in labeling. In the age of alternative facts, let's reflect on how often food labels actually reflect what is in the package. The Fair Packaging and Labeling Act of 1967 stated that all consumer commodities must be labeled to disclose their contents. Identity of commodity, name and place of business. But Jacob Grier, you recently brought to my attention this absurd legal battle in Florida where the small family farm was ordered to stop selling skim milk because it was skim milk.
Exactly, which sounds really counterintuitive.
Can you explain this to us?
Sure. So basically what happened was, well, if you go back in time, what happens when you skim milk, and the name is what it suggests, you make cream by skimming the fat off your milk, and what you're left with is the low-fat or non-fat milk there, and which traditionally we didn't really drink very much. It was fed to hogs or used in agricultural processes. But then when people started getting to more low-fat diets, people started drinking skim milk, and skim milk doesn't have vitamin A because the vitamin A is only soluble in fat. So when you skim off that cream, you're taking the vitamins with it. And so in both federally and in Florida, which is where this case came up, to call it skim milk, you're required to add vitamin A back in. So,
and was that the milk part so that you can call it
exactly,
milk
yeah. That was part
A?
of their what they call the standards of identity for skim milk, both by the FDA, which would handle it at a federal level, and then in Florida, where they have their own state laws. And so what happened was there was a creamery called, I think it's pronounced Ochisi Creamery, who makes all kinds of dairy products, and they pride themselves on being completely natural and adding nothing to whatever they make. And so they wanted to basically just serve real skim milk that had been skimmed, but they didn't want to have to then add vitamins back into it, because then they couldn't say that they didn't add anything to their products and that they weren't all natural. And then the state of Florida stepped in and said you can't do that. Because you don't have skim milk anymore by the state definitions. And what they wanted them to not say skim milk. Instead, their label was going to be non-grade A milk product, natural vitamins removed.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine trying to sell that at the farmer's market? Like, that's not going to go over well. So they fought that in court. And they actually lost at the early levels. But then the federal appeals court for the 11th Circuit, which covers 3 states in the South, ruled in their favor, and said that even as a business, they have a First Amendment right to make truthful claims about their product, and the obvious meaning of skim milk is exactly what they're serving. So they're now once again finally allowed to sell it.
That's insane.
Yeah.
This is what's wrong with the world, right here.
So my friend Balin Linekin is an author. He wrote a book called Biting the Hand That Feeds Us. And so he's covered a few other cases like this, where there's these outdated regulations that are then used by like existing businesses to hurt kind of more new or possibly even more sustainable competitors. So there was one in New York. There was a company called they're still around, thankfully. They're called O Milk, which was making like almond milks and cashew milks. And they were also were forced to, or they wanted to make them change their label, because there was a definition in New York law for something called melloreum from the 60s, which is what their word for alternative vegetable product milks were. So instead of using the word milk anywhere in the label, they had to revive this word from the 60s that nobody knows. So they eventually won as well. And then Just Mayo is another one, which is a new mayo product that's not technically mayonnaise because it doesn't have eggs in it. And so some other mayonnaise companies initially took them to court to try to force them to stop using that name.
That one I'm sort of torn on, and we actually discussed this product, I think, in episode 2. My understanding is that the culinary community loves this product. It's great to cook with, and it's delicious. But as a consumer, I see the word mayo, and I think it's going to have eggs in it. So I don't know. Should they really be allowed to use that word mayo?
Well, and I would say, especially when the rest of the name is just, you think, oh, all it is mayo with no additives, et cetera.
Yeah,
if it had been like
case,
yum mayo or almost mayo or something else.
Well, I think in that case they did actually have to add something to their label, but they were allowed to keep the brand name.
I mean, it's interesting that they were allowed to keep that, and yet these poor little farmers who are just making absolutely natural skim milk.
I know, that's the most absurd case I've seen.
Well, it's just a case, I mean, it happens so much where the original intention of a law or rule or, practice makes sense. It's like protection, right? We want to know what's in there. But when you take it to extremes, it's, of course, absurd and pointless and just helps the lawyers make some money.
It'll be interesting to see with marijuana edibles, Laurie, what happens with the packaging and labeling laws. I mean, I'm sure these fights are going to come up, but have you heard any controversies like this?
Ice creams. They're still working on whether can you call it an ice cream? A couple of companies are making cannabis-infused ice cream, but I think that they are not going to be allowed to call it ice cream. They're going to have to find another name. Like, I don't know if it's frozen, if it's going to be frozen dessert or, something, but it is not falling under the qualifications of what is required to call something ice cream.
I'm wondering if there are liquor-flavored or spirit-flavored ice creams, and if they're subject to the same thing. Although I'm wondering, if it's actually sold in a grocery store, it probably can't have any residual alcohol in it. It's probably only the flavor.
It's a flavoring agent. Yeah,
right.
I will. One thing when you were talking about the re-addition of the vitamin. I think that we talked a little bit about how in the decarbing process and in other processes, you will lose some of the important terpenes. So now you can buy terpenes and add everything that is lost in any of the processes. You can decide, okay, this is essentially just THC. We are now going to add, 3 different terpenes that, make sense with this strain or that people are looking for. So, if you go into dispensaries, you'll see little bottles. They're not psychoactive, but just these that capture the smell of the terpene that's added back.
Well, so Katherine, are we in 10 years from now, are we going to have a natural weed movement in the way you have natural wines where you don't want any manipulation?
Oh, there is.
Already,
organic, organic and green. There's some other thing, clean green, trying to keep your, everything organic. And
right.
So, yes, that is, I think at the moment, nothing can be called. Cannabis can't really be called organic because organic is a federally mandated appellation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what's going to happen with that. Certainly there are people wanting to go down that road and have,
and we're seeing that now, too, with the
organic.
FDA considering legal definitions for the words natural and healthy,
Right.
which could come up.
Yeah.
And so this is an ongoing debate about whether you should define something in law where it has the potential to become massively outdated, like the examples we talked about, or if you should leave it up to courts. And then if a company is making a misleading claim, then consumers or rivals can then take them to court and sort it out there rather than try to have regulators figure it out in advance and make that rule last forever.
That's so good to hear, Jacob, that the FDA is finally addressing that. Because
Well, it's a mixed bag. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if if their definition's not good.
That's true.
If they don't put it to good use, it could end up shutting out a lot of legitimate uses too. And
Well, it reminds me of in the chicken industry, I think you can call your chicken fresh, never frozen, if the internal temperature is 30 degrees Fahrenheit or something. I mean, it can be kind of frozen and it still qualifies as fresh, never frozen. So, right. So they could define natural as being not quite as narrowly defined as we might want it.
I guess that's the problem. I mean, codifying anything is basically impossible. Describing anything in words because someone will always find a way around it. But especially with food, it just seems like these things are defined, and then the next year, here come GMOs, or science finds a way around whatever the description or definition of some sort of food is, and then we have to come up with new rules, and it's very confusing. But I do think natural is a very misleading term. And then Michael Ruhlman, we had him on the previous show, and he had a great point, which is healthy is not even a term that should be applied to food. People are healthy, animals are healthy.
Healthful is the word you should use for food.
Yeah, the animal's definitely not healthy by the time it's on your plate. It's in a bad state.
Well, I was looking at some examples of misleading labeling that has turned into public controversy or court battles. Some of the most famous ones are Kraft. I don't think Kraft is allowed to call it macaroni and cheese. I think they call it Kraft dinner. And then their cheese slices are not called cheese, but they're called cheese food or cheese product. Pringles aren't allowed to be called chips, but they're called crisps. And then there was that Palm Wonderful court battle. I think because their advertisements misled consumers and they were telling people that they would live to be really old. They drink pomegranate juice. I don't know. Or do people really believe all these things?
Well, I think that's the thing, too. It's like consumers have to take some responsibility to, number one, not blame the food company if it was like, well, you said I was going to live to 100 and actually I didn't, because we know that that's absurd. So, I don't know. I feel like we're at a place where consumers really need to stand up a little more, fight back a little more, to, just learn what's good for them and not just believe all the claims that a corporation whose sole motive is profit, and that's what they're supposed to do. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what they need to do for their shareholders, but we don't have to believe them or eat their products.
And in the cannabis industry, you can't make anything that could be considered a false claim, like this will cure, whatever. It has to be, completely not addressing, like, this is going to help your memory, or this is going to help, they're quite strict about what promises.
Right. We see that in alcohol, too. I mean, companies would love to be able to advertise. There's actually pretty significant medical literature saying that moderate alcohol use lowers your risk of heart disease, but they're not allowed to say that in their packaging or their advertisements.
What about a cannabis product that says this may cause you to curl up in a ball in a fetal position for 8 hours?
Well, what they do have to say is the amount of time from when you indulge in an edible that you can expect results. And they're pretty strict about what promises. I guess no promises can be made.
Well, it certainly makes sense for a new industry like that to be super cautious.
Absolutely.
You don't want to blow it by, inadvertently overpromising or getting people in trouble. But Jacob, I'm getting back to your point about there are labels on alcohol warning against, fetal alcohol problems. And that's scientifically documented. But if the heart benefits are also pretty clearly documented, at what point do we get to change, or to add that?
I think that's going to be an uphill battle. I don't know if it'll ever come through. I mean, the health authorities are very resistant to anything that would encourage people to drink, understandably so. But in that case, it does seem that if there's not quite full scientific consensus, there's at least a solid body of evidence for it. But I don't think you'll see the regulators who have a very temperance attitude toward alcohol wanting to promote that anytime soon.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to move on to the figurative pot brownie of our show, which is the dessert portion where we each share something that we've been enjoying this week for our readers to also enjoy. I will start us off, switch gears a little bit to wine. I was just down in California at the Sunset International Wine Competition, and actually I'm not going to talk about wine. I'm going to talk about Sunset, which is a really great magazine, and if you haven't checked it out, if you're not from the West, you should still read it, enjoy it. They have a great sense of style. They cover food, beverages, travel, restaurants, and it's really a Western institution. And when I was down there at their offices, I learned that Sunset was founded in 1898. I didn't realize how old it was. And their first offices were destroyed by the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. And they were describing people running out carrying back issues so they could preserve, the original 1898 issues. So anyway, I just started thinking about what a great institution this Western magazine is. And listeners, if you haven't seen Sunset, at least go to the website and check out what they do, because it's a pretty special institution. Anyway, Jacob, what did you bring for us this week?
Well, I just got back from Melbourne, Australia. So I was down there for Good Beer Week, which is this massive 10-day beer festival with over 200 events that they do down there. But what really impressed me about Melbourne was the coffee scene. Possibly the best coffee city I've ever been to.
Really?
And I say that living in Portland. And we have great coffee here, obviously, but what blew me away about Melbourne was how good the food was in the coffee shops as well. Not only that there's just great coffee everywhere, but you can go into a coffee shop and get what would be considered an amazing brunch or breakfast in just about any place in Portland. So I was very impressed with the service doing there. And one of them is actually coming to Portland soon. Called Proud Mary, which is one of the leading roasters down in Australia. And so they're coming to the U.S., starting in Portland.
That's exciting.
So I'm really excited to see what they bring to the scene.
Nice.
I'll have to check that out. Laurie, did you bring us a pot brownie?
No, I didn't bring anything cannabis related. What I brought is my sad, sad feelings about White Castle.
Oh.
I grew up in the Bronx, and there were several White Castles, and every Sunday, my father would let mother sleep, and take me and my brother to the White Castle that was on Fordham Road, right near the Bronx Zoo. And I'm proud and ashamed to say that when I was 11, I ate 24 of them at one time.
Small.
They are so small. And at that time, they were really only a quarter of an inch. No, that's not true. They were a 4-inch thing, and I ate 24. Well, when we drove our daughter to college, she goes to college in St. Paul, went to college, she graduated, and there are White Castles there. I didn't even know there were still White Castles. And I have to say, they lost it. They just didn't do
I was
it.
going to ask, how many did you eat?
I got 8.
Okay.
And I really, after the 6th one, I really didn't want to have another.
And Laurie, I'm sure that has nothing to do with the fact that your tastes and standards may have changed a little bit since you were 11.
It's true.
It must be
true.
White Castle.
I thought it was a mix. It's probably changed some because it didn't even look like meat. Not that I knew exactly what meat looked like when I was 11, but this looked weird. And it was okay. But it just lost.
So even if you have a terrible case of the munchies,
Right, I was just going
well, with a terrible case of the munchies, I'd eat my shoe. But it just was a little sad because they have this Crave case where it's like this cardboard attaché case and you get 30 of them.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and I used to do that all the time in New York. And I was like, no Crave case. Nobody should have 30 of these bizarre little things. So
Yeah, we got to leave our childhood behind sometime.
We do.
Right.
Well, Martha, how about you?
Well, my dessert is a little media tidbit. Last time I joined you, one of your guests was a producer of a cool movie on James Beard, the famous foodie. And there's another movie that's out that I've only seen the trailer and I'm dying to see it. It's on Jeremiah Tower. And I fear that a lot of younger people don't know who he is or what he was, but Jeremiah Tower really kind of started California cuisine. He was really the guy behind Chez Panisse. He was, in the gang with Alice Waters and did the whole menu that kind of put them on the map and was a main chef there. And then he went on to start Stars in San Francisco. And that was back in the early 80s, I think. And that's about the time that I first started getting into cooking. And I remember the Jeremiah Tower cookbook. And his signature was in the front, and it must have been, the letters must have been 4 inches high. He was a super big ego, very handsome, leonine hairstyle. And he really was kind of one of the first celebrity chefs. Plus, he was just really important in this, American ingredients, California cuisine. So the movie is produced by 0.0 Productions, and Anthony Bourdain is the executive producer. And it's going to be playing around the country in various places, and I'm sure that, it'll eventually make its way to online. But I think the movie's going to be cool. There's going to be a lot of gossip in there, lots of good food gossip. But also, I think it's just so important to realize, oh, yeah, people did this stuff a while ago, and that's why our food scene is what it is today.
That sounds great. And I know Jeremiah Tower used to be such a big name in cuisine, and nowadays we don't talk about him so much anymore. I'm really excited to see that. And
He really was influential. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I can't wait to see that. Well, thanks to all you amazing panelists. Thank you, Martha Holmberg, the former editor-in-chief and publisher of Fine Cooking magazine, as well as the Oregonian newspaper's food section and Mix magazine, back when you were my boss. Thanks for being here. Laurie Wolf, whose company Laurie and Mary Jane produces small batch cannabis-infused edibles. So good to have you here.
Oh, it was fun.
Jacob Grier, author of Cocktails on Tap and expert in libertarian theory. Thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for listening, everyone. And thanks to our founding station, OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting, where we recorded this episode back in 2017. And hey, a reminder, everyone, please go to theforetop.org, scroll down on the homepage, and click on the survey button to share your feedback on building a better foretop. You can also enter your email address at the end of the survey to participate in a drawing to receive, wait for it, a tote bag. I know, we break up with public radio, and now we're giving out eco-friendly tote bags. I know. Anyway, thank you, beloved listeners. We love you. And now here is Keelan King, whose smooth voice I am so jealous of, to take us out.
This has been the Four Top Podcast. Katherine Cole is our executive producer, Izzy Kramer is our producer, and I'm Keelan King, editor and audio technician. We are also assisted by Rachel Grossman in editorial and Lex Rule in design. We'd love to hear what you think of this episode and how we can improve the Foretop moving forward. So please visit our website, theforetop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, reach out to us on social media, and purchase books written by our amazing panelists. And if you have not already subscribed to The Foretop on iTunes, NPR One, or Spotify, please do so and leave us a rating. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.